I knew something was wrong the moment I walked into the room and saw my charts on the floor. Torn in half. Damien, slick haircut, no socks and loafers, smelling like a cologne called entitlement, was perched on the conference table like he'd invented gravity. This, he said, holding up a piece of my continuity diagram like it was a used napkin, is what we're replacing. The rest of the team looked away. No one laughed, but no one said a damn thing either. He called it agile disruption. I called it a toddler with a chainsaw. See, I'd spent 6 years at Virintech building a layered fallback infrastructure that had survived 2 blackouts, 3 vendor outages, and a ransomware scare that left our competitors begging regulators for mercy. But that wasn't shiny enough for Damien. His background? Marketing. His superpower? Making other people's work look outdated while doing absolutely nothing but smiling at himself in mirrored windows. And just real quick, before I go further into this tale of idiocy, sabotage, and poetic justice, do me one small favor. If you enjoy stories where the underdog doesn't just bite back, but rewires the whole damn system, hit the like button and subscribe. It keeps this channel alive and helps us keep sharing what really goes on behind corporate closed doors. Anyway, Damien had been with us for maybe 3 weeks when he decided we didn't need continuity planning at all. He canceled our quarterly simulation drills, said they were fear-based legacy rituals. Then he renamed my entire protocol file, from continuity and recovery system to dead weight protocols v1, like he thought he was clever. I didn't say a word. I just noted the timestamp and watched him tie his own noose with a double Windsor. Thing is, Damien didn't know the architecture he was gutting wasn't entirely owned by Virintech. Halden Key Lane, the vendor that controlled our system validators, that was my LLC. I created it before joining Virion. I licensed the validator infrastructure to Virintech through a back-end procurement layer buried 2 vendors deep in the stack. Fully above board. Fully declared. But the only person who actually understood how the validators authenticated was me. The validator chain was designed to protect against the exact kind of disaster Damien was sleepwalking toward. Remove it improperly, and nothing syncs. Data flows break. Logs stop matching. Backups look like corrupt spaghetti. And you know what? I warned him. I warned him in an email titled, literally, "Do not disable validation layer without transfer authorization." His response? "Thanks for the feedback. We'll simplify and patch it post-migration." That patch never came. What came instead was a Friday morning ambush. 8:04 a.m., he called me into the glass fishbowl meeting room with HR already seated like I was being read my last rites. "We're simplifying," he said, sipping cold brew like it made him smarter. "Your role's obsolete, effective immediately." I nodded, stood up, picked up my notebook. He smirked and said, "Keys?" I smiled back, steady as ever. "You'll need a validator first." His forehead pinched just slightly. I left before the panic could settle in. The man had just fired the only person who could keep his house of cards from catching fire in the wind, and he didn't even realize it. That morning, I drove home in silence. The good kind. The kind where you know the math is on your side and the storm is already brewing behind you. Damien didn't waste time swinging his wrecking ball. By Tuesday, he'd canceled our redundancy drill, something we'd done every quarter since the ransomware scare of 19. The same drill that had saved our asses when Blackline systems crashed, and we rerouted traffic in under 2 minutes flat. Gone. He killed it with a shrug. "Waste of time," he said, poking at my old checklist with the back of a Mont Blanc pen. "If we're migrating to full cloud, we don't need any of this legacy stuff." I leaned forward just slightly. Our integrity tools were never designed for full cloud without physical fallback, not with the way our data registry resolves timestamps. He grinned, that awful, lazy grin of his. "We'll patch it later." It wasn't bravado. It was the blank confidence of someone who didn't even know the shape of what he was breaking. He reminded me of a guy who sees wires under a car hood and assumes color coding makes them optional. One of my engineers, Travis, came to me later that day. "He's rewriting your continuity script," he said, in a Google Doc. I asked how far along. Travis gave me that look you give when your dog eats chocolate. He's already renamed it, calls it dead weight protocols. I almost laughed. He thought renaming a system file would erase its purpose, that if it didn't sound like it came from the Silicon Valley in 2023, it had no value. What he didn't realize was the system wasn't just files and flows, it was contracts, licensing chains, time-limited authentications embedded in every validator node. It was muscle memory from 6 years of midnight simulations and vendor calls and incremental testing. And buried underneath it all, like a landmine he kept stepping over with every idiotic change, was Halden Key Limited, my LLC. Technically, Halden Key sat 2 layers below our primary vendor, NetDelta Services. On paper, Virentech contracted NetDelta. NetDelta sublicensed data integrity validation through a quiet B2B service hub called Winspan. Winspan's registry was managed by Halden Key. That's me. I'd set it up after watching too many critical tools get swallowed by corporate mergers and killed for budget. I wanted control, not to hoard it, but to protect it from this exact flavor of stupidity. And here comes Damien, thinking you can just drag files into a trash folder and yell "Agile" loud enough for the lights to stay on. By Thursday, he was giving streamlined briefings to the engineering team, calling the old system paranoid overkill. He drew a chart, some kind of triangle with the word flex in the middle. It looked like something ripped out of a TEDx talk held in a SoulCycle lobby. One of the engineers asked about validator load balancing. He blinked. "What's that?" I walked out of the room before I said something that'd land me in HR for real. That night, I poured a glass of wine, logged into Halden Key's dashboard, and checked the lease clock. Validator contract. 32B Delta Shift Log. Active. Auto-renewed. Revoke privileges pending administrative oversight, which, by design, meant not transferable without dual-signed authorization. From me. He was running full speed toward a wall I'd bricked up 6 years ago, and I wasn't going to stop him. Because sometimes, letting a fool yank the wrong wire is the only way anyone notices the lights are out. Friday morning smelled like burnt coffee and cheap ambition. Damien didn't even look up from his tablet when I walked past the bullpen. Just flicked his wrist toward the glass conference room like I was being summoned by royalty. HR was already seated, nervously fiddling with a printed packet. No eye contact. Just that overpracticed empathy expression they use when they know they're helping fire someone who actually kept the lights on. "Thanks for joining," Damien said, like we were about to discuss paint swatches. He clicked his pen, leaned back, and crossed his arms like he was posing for a leadership workshop brochure. "We've been reevaluating roles in light of the transition." I didn't sit. "This isn't personal," he added, as if that made it smell any less like betrayal. "We're simplifying. Your role, while historic, is now obsolete, effective immediately." Historic. Like I was a Civil War statue getting yanked off a pedestal. HR slid the packet across the table. I glanced at it. Severance. NDA all templated and clean. Just another name swap in a spreadsheet they probably built yesterday. I nodded. No visible emotion, just slow breath, steady spine. I reached down and picked up my notebook. The same one I'd been using for the last 6 years. Same green marker tabs sticking out from the side. He looked at it like it might explode. Then came the part he'd been rehearsing. He gestured with an open palm. "I'll need your keys." I looked him straight in the eye and said, "You'll need a validator first." The moment hung there. He blinked, like someone just switched the subtitles off mid-movie. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. HR looked confused. I smiled gently at her. "They're in the system, tied to the credential chain." Which was true, except they weren't his system anymore. I turned, walked out without another word. The office was unusually quiet. A couple people peeked over monitors. No one spoke. The kind of silence that knows something just cracked, even if it hasn't made a sound yet. By the time I hit the lobby, my email was deactivated, badge revoked, phone wiped. But I still had access where it mattered, because Damien didn't revoke the one thing that counted. He couldn't, because he never asked how any of it actually worked. The validator chain required a handoff, a dual signature protocol. I built it that way after watching another company lose millions trying to brute force a revoked key system. There were protections, locks, escalation triggers, all in code and legal. So when Damien smirked and pulled that trigger, he didn't just fire me. He severed access to the only authentication authority that verified their continuity stack. The validators that kept their cloud sync compliant, their partners synced, their logs traceable, all tethered to a license they no longer had any legal right to use. It was almost surgical, the way it happened. No yelling, no threats. I didn't fight to stay. I gave him exactly what he wanted. And underneath that quiet exit, buried in every unread clause and forgotten vendor layer, was the fuse. Monday morning hit them like a car crash in slow motion. One system failed, then another, then three more in a row, like a chain of dominoes toppling into silence. At 9:12 a.m., Virintech's primary recovery console froze mid-boot, throwing an authentication error no one recognized. 4 engineers huddled around it like priests over a dying altar. No one could get it to verify. "Run the fallback stack," Damien barked. They tried. But the logs wouldn't match. Internal timestamps wouldn't align with the external checksum verifiers. Version histories spun like roulette wheels, failing silently. By 10:40 a.m., 2 external vendors called in. One was confused. The other was furious. "We're not syncing," the second said. "Your validation layer's throwing fails. What the hell are you running?" Damien didn't have an answer, but he sure as hell had a lot of volume. He yelled at IT, then barked at legal. By noon, he was pacing the glass hallway like a confused stockbroker the day after a market crash. People started looking over their shoulders. I wasn't there, but I got texts, screenshots, Slack messages that got forwarded to my personal phone from coworkers who knew damn well what was coming. "They're digging," one message read, "looking for anything with Halden key on it." And sure enough, that's where the blood trail led. Halden Key Lantad Validator License Agreement. Line 17. Authentication and continuity assurance require active controller authorization. In the event of severance or revocation, all system-level validators will default to fail-safe mode unless reassigned via dual signature override. Damien had fired the only person with signature rights. The contract was watertight. I had filed it personally with vendor compliance, time-stamped, verified, archived both digitally and in hard copy, signed by me and the original CTO, long since gone. Damien never even knew to look for it. He had assumed Halden Key was just some vendor buried in a stack of procurement contracts. Invisible, disposable. But Halden Key had always been mine. I'd started it quietly when I realized how often companies outsource their critical systems to vendors they didn't even vet. I didn't want control. I wanted continuity. And when Virintech brought me in 6 years ago, I gave them both. They just never bothered to understand the layers behind the miracle of nothing ever goes down. Until now, everything was down, and the system wouldn't budge. The validators didn't care about urgency or screaming or press releases. They were designed to listen to one thing, the controller key, and I wasn't listening. Worse, the compliance team found the clause too late. Not just the technical language, but the timestamp. Because Damien had already announced the full migration in a press release the Friday I left. Publicly declared it. Full cloud continuity by Q2, he'd promised. We've eliminated outdated protocols to streamline performance. And now, the outdated protocol had become the very spine they couldn't function without. Legal couldn't touch it, AT couldn't spoof it, procurement couldn't replace it, because the system wasn't broken. It was doing exactly what I built it to do, protect itself from idiots. By Tuesday, the panic had found its rhythm. What started as raised eyebrows turned into 5 a.m. email chains flagged urgent, cross-team. Legal was holding triage sessions in the boardroom like it was a hostage negotiation. I was still getting pinged, off-grid, unofficially, from friends inside. Screenshots, meeting notes, Damien's face in blurry video thumbnails, always mid-sentence, always sweating. They'd finally pulled my personnel file. Buried in the attachments was my original contract. Scanned, time-stamped, archived under Senior Continuity Strategist, Infrastructure Architecture. The digital forensics team surfaced the clause before lunch, Section 11A. Validator licensing shall remain external unless specifically revoked via co-signed asset transfer. 16 words. That's all it took to freeze half the building, because there was no such asset transfer, no override, no co-signature. Damien hadn't requested one. Legal hadn't filed one. And since the licensing was external, owned entirely by Halden Key Limited, they were operating on borrowed keys they no longer had the right to use. It wasn't sabotage, it was omission. They hadn't disabled the system. They disconnected the only person authorized to keep it alive, and it gets worse. In that same stack of documents, legal unearthed the email thread between Damien and Comms from the day I was let go. A draft of the press release titled Virion Tech Streamlines Infrastructure for the Future, dated the same Friday morning, stamped at 9:32 a.m., 28 minutes after I walked out the front door. The quote read, "Our new direction eliminates legacy protocols and repositions us for full cloud agility." They published it by noon, meaning they'd made the migration public before realizing the validators were privately owned, before consulting legal, before checking which legacy protocols were actually under contract. The moment that press release went out, so did the clock. See, Halden Key wasn't just a licensing shell, it was an active controller. The moment Verintech publicly announced the migration, Halden Key's compliance trigger activated, a simple automated audit note sent to Winspan's registry API. It flagged a chain alteration without controller consent. That one action, it froze the validator lease from issuing further sync keys. Everything that followed? A perfectly silent implosion, and I wasn't hiding any of this. I'd disclosed Halden Key in my onboarding paperwork. I'd flagged it again during every quarterly licensing review. Hell, I'd even given a presentation 3 years ago on third-party validator resilience. Slide 7 featured Halden Key as the poster child. They just never looked. Because people like Damien don't read systems. They assume they inherit them like old trophies, and the rules bend once the smirk lands right. He thought authority came from title, not understanding, from volume, not precision. But the system wasn't listening to him. It was waiting for the one signature it knew. Mine. And now, every second they spent scrambling through outdated binders and Slack threads wasn't just costing time. It was burning contracts, breaching SLAs, bleeding clients. Legacy, after all, always leaves fingerprints, even if the fools in charge don't know where to look. By Wednesday morning, the storm had breached the walls. Virion's top data vendor, Stratamex, filed a formal breach alert. The email subject line read, "Failed checksum, validator chain non-compliant." It went out to every C-level executive at Virion, 2 regulatory liaisons, and importantly, Mintra Logistics. Mintra was Virion's largest client, a multimodal logistics giant that moved everything from insulin shipments to military-grade avionics. For Mintra, one misaligned timestamp could mean a $7 million logistics cascade failure. So when Stratamex flagged the validator error, Mintra didn't wait. They issued a compliance pause by 9:34 a.m. Every sync, every data push, every automated partner feed halted. Virion's legal team started bleeding caffeine and printer toner. Damien, sleeves rolled, tie gone, was now pacing so hard the glass doors shook. He'd started the week with TED Talk energy and now looked like a man who lost a chess game he didn't know he was playing. Inside Halden Key's dashboard, I saw it all unfolding, one line at a time. We'd built in a passive audit mirror for internal tracking. No access to their systems, just metadata, the kind you pick up from packet confirmation requests and registry pings, just enough to know where the waterline was rising. And right on cue, our system flagged the event. Stratimex non-compliance notice. Source, data partner tier 1, time, 09 or 32:19. That same hour, I pushed a silent update to the registry through Winspan. Controller role. Status, revoked due to administrative severance, no bolding, no blinking lights. Just one added line in a subfield most compliance people never read until a disaster forces them to scroll. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even a warning. It was a statement of legal record. The person responsible for validator continuity had been removed. And because Halden Key operated under a strict controller-executor protocol, the system did exactly what it was designed to do. It froze, not crashed. Froze. Validators stopped issuing new handshakes. Previous tokens began to expire on schedule, no longer refreshed. Fail-safes kicked in. Mirrors failed to verify integrity. Cross-syncs with Mintra and 2 other Tier 2 vendors were instantly quarantined. By noon, 3 legal teams were on speakerphone together, one from Virion, one from Stratamex, one from Mintra, and all of them were saying the same thing. Where is the controller? My name came up a lot that day. No one called me. No one dared. Not after the registry update went live. Not after legal found the clause. Not after the founder herself forwarded the Stratimex alert with one line to Damien. Fix this now. But there was no fix, because you can't patch over a revoked signature. You can't override a contract with hope and spin. You can't streamline your way out of a system that was built to outlive people like Damien. The validator chain had no opinions. It had no favorites. It just had rules. And for the first time in his career, Damien was being held accountable by something he couldn't charm, bluff, or ignore. A clock was ticking. And the silence was getting louder. By Thursday, Damien's composure had unraveled into pure scramble. The emails started first. Polite, faux casual. Hey, hoping we can touch base on the validator situation. Would love your insight on resolving this quickly. Then came the voicemails, more desperate, less curated. One even ended with a long sigh and a muttered, "Jesus Christ." I didn't answer. I'd already passed everything over to my attorney, whose response was as dry and surgical as a scalpel. Our client holds no obligation to transfer proprietary validators. All licensing was terminated in accordance with Section 11A upon administrative severance. One sentence. No emotion. Just the clean click of a door locking. And while Damien was busy flailing through back channels and urgent sync invites, something else happened. Quietly, cleanly. Rivet Core, Virintech's nearest competitor in infrastructure continuity, rolled out their new validator-driven stack. No press release, no neon headlines, just a line in their monthly compliance update. Continuity Engine, Rever 1.0, now certified and active. Their system passed every audit. Checksum validated, mirrors clean, timestamps aligned. It didn't take long for word to get out. By Friday morning, Mintra's procurement team flagged the update, then Stratimex, then 3 other regional partners who'd been quietly panicking over Virion's radio silence. Someone leaked a screenshot from Rivet's internal dashboard. My eyes went straight to the footer. Back-end validation supported via third-party service. Halden Key Litit. Familiar? Of course it was. I didn't burn my blueprint. I built a better one. Rivet had approached me a year prior. They'd seen what I was doing inside Virion and asked if I'd consult. At the time, I declined. But when I walked out that Friday morning with my notebook and my legal autonomy intact, the next step wasn't revenge. It was relevance. So I called them, set up a call, shared some architecture notes. Halden Key issued a licensing proposal, a clean, legally distinct continuity engine, built from scratch, but with the same principles I had honed for 6 years. Secure, redundant, immutable. They ran it through their sandbox. It passed. We inked the deal 3 weeks later, so while Damien was sweating through legal briefs and redlining procurement appeals, Rivet's dashboard was humming. Clean code, fresh keys, 0 disruptions. Viren's partners started asking questions they hadn't dared ask yet. Why was Rivet working? Why were they compliant? Why did their validators look so damn familiar? It wasn't sabotage. It was survival. And when someone builds the system, understands its soul, and walks away without slamming a single door, what's left behind isn't a threat. It's a void. And in business, voids don't stay empty for long. The room was full by 8:57 a.m. Not just executives this time. Partners, regulators, compliance liaisons, and a few outside counsel flown in overnight. They'd cleared the 12th floor war room, covered the glass walls with blackout panels. No laptops allowed. Phones face down. The only one not physically present was the founder herself, Beatrice Langford, attending via secured virtual stream from some minimalist lake house no one dared ask about. She logged in mid-sentence, right as the Stratimex rep was outlining the timeline of system failures, voice tight, eyes wide. And by our logs, the last validator token successfully refreshed at 10:28 a.m. Friday, just under 2 hours after the employee's termination. Beatrice didn't blink. "Let me be clear," she said. "We need to know how we lost continuity in 3 days. Not a slow decay, not a systems bug, a full stop." Silence. The kind that pinches behind the ears. You could hear someone shift in their chair, a paper cup crackling under a nervous thumb. Damien stood near the end of the long table, flanked by two members of legal who looked like they'd aged 10 years since Monday. His laptop was open, but he wasn't typing, just scrolling endlessly as if some explanation might materialize in the footer. One of the attorneys cleared her throat. Per our internal review, she began, continuity architecture was licensed through Halden Key Ltd. Validator control was bound to a third-party controller, Ms. Lane, under a contract clause stating no reassignment could occur without dual signature authorization. She read it aloud. Section 11A. Everyone in the room listened like it was scripture. Someone from Mintra leaned in, eyes narrowed. So you fired the only person with the authority to preserve your infrastructure and then announced to the public that you were migrating without her signature? The air sucked out of the room like a punctured tire. Damien opened his mouth, then closed it. Beatrice didn't move. Her image froze for a moment, bandwidth lag, but even the pixels radiated tension. And then it came, from the back of the room, quiet, matter-of-fact without any drama. Wait, why would you fire her? It wasn't accusatory. It wasn't even rhetorical. It was just stupidly, plainly obvious, and that's what made it lethal. Every eye in the room turned, slowly, instinctively, toward Damien. He froze. The scroll wheel on his trackpad kept going under one finger. Nervous tick. Beatrice didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her face on that screen, dead still, unreadable, said everything. The look of a founder doing the arithmetic in real time, cost of damage, time to rebuild trust, fallout with clients, cleanup of a press release she didn't approve. And worst of all, the irreversible answer to a question no one had bothered to ask until it was too late. There wasn't a single raised voice, no slam of fists, just a silence that weighed 1,000 pounds, pressing down on Damien's chest until you could practically hear the air strain to escape him. One by one, people started closing their folders. The meeting wasn't over, but the conversation was. And just like that, the only smirk left in the building belonged to the absence I'd left behind. It ended not with a bang, but a footnote. Rivet Corps posted their quarterly regulatory filing on the last Friday of the month. Buried between licensing renewals and infrastructure notes, line 12.4.3 read, all systems now supported via Halden Key Validation Protocol, Revim 1.0. No spotlight, no celebratory blog post, just a quiet line of text that meant everything, and they all saw it. Virian's clients noticed immediately, not because of the name, but because of the silence that followed. Clean syncs, no validator lags, no frantic emails, just a system that worked, reliably, without drama. They started drifting, gently, like a tide pulling away from a crumbling pier. No announcements, just canceled calls, missed renewals, shifting procurement schedules. Beatrice never released a statement. She didn't need to. By then, everyone already knew what the real failure was, and where the stability had gone. As for Damien, the company posted a 3-line memo Monday morning. We thank Damien Reeves for his service. Effective immediately, he will transition into a strategic advisory role outside core operations. A replacement will be announced shortly. Reassigned, not fired. That would have been too clean. No, they needed him boxed up and shelved, somewhere quiet where the investors wouldn't ask questions and the press wouldn't smell blood. I didn't speak publicly, never posted on LinkedIn, never replied to the messages that trickled in from colleagues with emojis and "you were right" subject lines. I didn't need vindication. I had the keys. Halden Key's validator chain remained intact. Every lease still pulsing under my name, every refreshed token clean, every registry timestamp mirrored against a copy I kept offline in ink, notarized and archived. No one challenged it, because they couldn't. The signature they wanted, my signature, was never given. And in the world we built, that meant no access, no override, no reset button hidden behind a friendly lunch or a rewritten job description. Systems, after all, aren't emotional. They don't forgive. They log. And mine logged everything. So when Rivet's system passed the final audit, when the last client migrated, when Viren's board quietly shifted budget lines away from infrastructure recovery and into strategic concessions. I sat in my home office, opened my Halden key console, and saw the chain still ticking. Still mine, still live. Sometimes legacy isn't a statue or a story. Sometimes it's just a line of code that never lets the wrong people back in. They never reached out again. Not once. No counteroffer. No, let's revisit this. No half-hearted email from HR trying to smooth over unfortunate circumstances. They knew. Beatrice especially. She understood the second that clause was read out loud, back in that boardroom with the blackout panels and the boiling silence. She'd built empires off intuition, but this time, it was math. The equation was simple. One controller key, one signature never given, one system designed to do nothing when handled improperly, and me gone. With perfect legality. I watched from a distance as the team reshuffled. Titles disappeared from the org chart like expired software licenses. Damien's LinkedIn went dark for a month before resurfacing with a vague strategic transition banner and a photo where he looked 10 years older. Some junior PM got promoted into a role that used to span 4 desks and 3 job titles. They stopped talking about validators entirely, like the word itself left a burn mark in their mouths. Rivet, meanwhile, never brought me into the spotlight. That was part of the deal. My name didn't need to headline anything. Halden Key was the signature. It validated itself. When the engine hummed and compliance reports showed nothing but green, that was enough. Legacy without noise. Sometimes silence is louder than revenge. And the funny thing is, I didn't lift a finger to ruin them. I never touched a file, never tampered with a login. I just let the design do what it was built to do: reject unauthorized control, protect continuity, expose arrogance. A system doesn't argue, it doesn't scream, it doesn't offer second chances, it just logs. So no one asked me twice. They just adjusted the lighting, erased my initials from the onboarding deck, and learned quietly, humbly, not to smirk at the systems they didn't understand. I didn't burn a bridge. I installed a validator at the other end of it, and when they tried to cross without asking, well, the system said no.